Hi everyone, thanks for attending today's presentation on auditing cloud services. Well, this is a brief agenda. We're going to go start with the introduction, go over cloud service overview, cloud service risks, challenges, auditing example. We're going to go over Salesforce and then sample questions when you're auditing Salesforce. Starting with the introduction, this is Al Abbas from BizTech's Risk and Security Practice. And we are going to go skip through attendee introductions as this is a webinar. Well, the cloud services overview. The types of cloud services include IaaS, PaaS, SaaS. So basically infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. We most commonly observe software as a service. So our focus here will be for software as a service. Infrastructure as a service is where you're basically renting the infrastructure using some infrastructure service providers. Rackspace is one example. Rackforce is another. Platform as a service is where you're basically getting the platform. So let's say you're getting the operating system platform. So you're getting the environment, but you're not getting the application. You're putting your own application, but you're getting, let's say, you're renting, or basically cloud service is basically just like renting versus buying. So you're basically using obtaining server space, and you're getting the let's say web hosting environment. You're getting the server space as well as you're getting let's say content management system or others, and then you're putting in your own application, or let's say you're getting the operating system. So you're getting the server, you're getting the operating system, and then you are putting your own applications there. So that's the platform as a service. And then there's the SaaS, which is cloud as a service, where you're getting everything, and you're just like Salesforce is an example of a cloud software as a service provider. So again, I mentioned briefly a little earlier, it's similar to renting versus buying. So you're just instead of buying everything and putting it in-house and getting IT staff to support that environment, you are not doing that. You're renting this space basically, or the service. And basically the focus now is that companies want to focus on their core competency rather than getting everything, they cannot be good at IT and others if they're not an IT company. So that's the overall idea. And that's why companies that have expertise in a particular area, they want to be just responsible for that and outsource or basically utilize outside services to provide those other IT services that they need. So let's say a company which does manufacturing is not IT is not their core business, so they can have some staff to do IT, but then they use cloud services and leave it to people who are experts at doing. Let's say a manufacturing company wants to get a CRM, customer relationship management system. They don't have the resources to get everything. They can, but they will not be the best CRM company, or they may not be the best, not be having the best CRM. So it's best to leave it to the experts who are doing CRM, such as Salesforce, to provide that service. Now SaaS, most common is again the most common cloud service. And what is a cloud service? Sometimes people have this hazy concept of what a cloud service is. So basically, it's a cloud service provider has a bunch of servers running applications. They have the whole infrastructure. The infrastructure, the platform, and the cloud service application that they're running in their environment, and they're basically giving you access to their environment. And they basically you set up your own instance of the application typically, and your company environment can access your application. Let's say Salesforce application. So you can set up your company's instance on Salesforce, and then you can access your company's environment over the internet using a browser. So that's a very simple description of what a cloud service is. And now we're going to talk about what are the risks. So again, you're depending on the infrastructure of the service provider. So if you have critical data, depending on how critical the environment is, it really depends on how good the infrastructure of the service provider is, and or the cloud services provider is, and how good that organization, the you're basically they'll be your vendor, and how good they are. And you a few things to look at in terms of risks are the SLA, the service level agreements that the cloud service provider gives you, and to kind of get your comfort level higher on how good the service they will be providing on an ongoing basis as well, is you should look at certifications such as ISO 27001. So when you're putting sensitive data on a cloud service, you need to make sure that your customer data is protected, and when it's in the vendor's infrastructure, you don't know how they're going to handle it, so you need to get some assurance. So ISO 27001 is a certification you should ask from your cloud service providers. Some organizations also get the service provider audit, so they have what is called a CSAE 16 or SSAE 16 in US, CSAE 16 in Canada. So they get those also. They are basically more of the organizations decide on the controls that they need to implement. So it's not really for security. You should look at the controls that were tested by the auditor, because it could be there's no standard that the SSAE 16 follows in terms of what controls should all be there. It's between a negotiation between the service provider, the customer, and the auditor. So uh, that's another option. You can look at that. It just adds to the assurance that, well, an organization has SSAE 16 or CSAE 16 as well as ISO 27001 certifications. And you need to make sure that the certifications are valid and they're current. And the other things you should look at is, like in the contracts, what is the provision for uptime, response time, and disaster recovery setup, and the communication plan. Let's say if something goes wrong with the cloud service providers environment, how will they communicate things? How do they keep their backups and disaster recovery setup, and how will you get your data when you need it? What are the provisions for that? And what is the security of your data when it is resting in the cloud service provider's environment? And you should, because depending on the data, you could be held responsible if an organization has given you data, or if an individual or your customers have given you their sensitive data, and then you're hosting it in a cloud environment, and then something goes wrong, then you could be on the hook as well as the cloud service provider. So other things you should look at are, contracts that you have with the cloud service providers. They should have provisions for capability to obtain and migrate data easily. So let's say you've signed on with a cloud service provider. You've you're entering data. You've put in a lot of data. Suddenly they increase the price to double, and they say you cannot access the cloud service until you pay us double the price. So again, what kind of legal recourses do you have in those situations? And in other case, what if they say we'll give you your data, but it's all like it's not formatted, it's not like a CSV file, so it's like very hard for you to migrate the data to another system. So you should make sure that you're clear on that all the data that you have, you should be able to have access to it. Even if there's any pricing issue or pricing change or dispute, you should be able to get your data out in the format that is easily transferable. Um, the other portion, the risks are basically access management. So you can look at whether it's a public cloud or a private cloud. So now, Oracle has public cloud service as well as private cloud service. What it means is uh, public cloud, you can access it anywhere. Private cloud, it's not accessible outside. It's just for your organization. And it's the again, there are different variations in the private cloud service offering. It could be a dedicated environment just for your organization. It could be physically separated servers that could be set up just to serve your organization, and they could be in a private cloud configuration. There could be different variations. It could be physically separated server. It could be virtual server that is independent of other virtual instances of machines, so that once your data is not in the same location, whether physically or virtually, as the data of other companies or other users. So you can separate things as you like, and it's going a little deeper into the configuration of the cloud service. But these are some of the high level areas to look at to see how your environment is, and then assess what the risks are in that setup based on the information that is being handled by the system. Now, some of the challenges, if you're using large cloud service providers, they'll have a standard contract, and they may not provide all the information depending on the size of your organization. If you're a smaller organization utilizing a much larger business, they'll typically just have a standard contract, and you may not be able to make much changes unless you have large enough size or volume or sale. Like basically, you're paying if you're paying them enough, then they may be able to make changes. But if you're a small organization or mid-sized organization, uh, buying services from a much larger organization, they may not really be able to adjust to your specific needs. Uh, Again, they have many of them have standardized contracts that do not allow for much changes, and you may not be able to obtain a lot of knowledge of how the cloud service provider works internally. But again, it's about depending, choosing the right provider. And From an audit perspective, it's like looking at what the particular provider has offered in terms of evidence, whether, kind of what we talked in the earlier slide about certification status. So basically, it's like a third-party verification. If somebody has ISO 27001 certification or other such certifications, that somebody else is coming in and verifying that the organization is following best practices in security as well of your data. And other challenges internally, some IT staff think that just because it's a cloud service, they are not responsible. It's just, outsourced, and it's the cloud service is a big organization, so it does not pose a risk to the organization, and they just have a hands-off approach. And we're going to go over more details on the specific risks from a configuration perspective of the cloud service that your organization should be responsible for. So here's auditing example. So we're gonna give you example of Salesforce, and again, IT might think moving from in-house environment to the cloud. Generally, what happens is it reduces some risks but increases other risks. So the infrastructure risks are reduced. Typically, Salesforce has a strong infrastructure, so when you're moving things over there, and they are ISO 27001 certified as well, so in general, you have a more of a comfort zone that the infrastructure risks are reduced when you're moving over to Salesforce, which is a CRM again. And they have many other modules now, so they not only have CRM but a lot of other bells and whistles in terms of the services they provide. Now, identity and access management risks are increased. Now, identity and access management risks uh, may be increased if the environment is not configured correctly for the Salesforce environment. And we're going to talk more about those later. So how are the risks increased? So mostly what we see is too many users having admin level access, or um, internally the authentication and authorization not configured properly. So here is a list of a number of sample questions that the auditor should ask when they're auditing a Salesforce environment and look at the Salesforce configuration. And we've actually gone deep into how to confirm the different details. So in the Salesforce configuration, and just go over the highlights here. So they have the identity confirmation activation. So you have to see whether it's that activation is configured properly, and the direction, like say you have to. The Salesforce has a menu. Basically, you click on setup, security controls, activations, and then drill down to the activated login IPs and activated client browsers. And you can basically see how many users have what activation. So depending on your organization's policy, you may have that a user should only use one device. If they have a BYOD setup or not, they should only be able to access Salesforce from one device only, that's your work computer. So they should not be accessing from other computers. So this could be configured in different variations. You can configure it on Salesforce that only certain IPs can access Salesforce. So it's going through the organization's proxy server, so it's only the organization's IP is accessible. Or if you have remote access allowed, then you can see what other devices as an employee is accessing Salesforce from, and so those are some of the things you can look at. And if somebody has too many, if you have a user with 10 devices uh, that have access to Salesforce, maybe there's an issue there where maybe a user has sold the device or given it to the family members, and that device is still authorized. So those are some of the things to look at. Also, you should look whether the Salesforce has a sandbox environment. So you should see if they have actually done the testing or sandbox environment before they actually put things in Salesforce production environment. And for mobile access, you have to see if the policy is to not have mobile access. The Salesforce have a mobile app also, so you should see if the organization's policy is that mobile access should not be enabled. Then you should go in the configuration and see whether it's actually enabled or not. And the other questions to ask is if any code customizations on Salesforce that have been performed. And if they are, then it's a matter of looking at process and how those, what sort of cost customizations have been performed and what are the risks related to that. And if there are any, so again, Salesforce allows integration with third parties such as Google Apps. So if there have been any integrations done for Salesforce, then you have to look at the risks on the configuration with those integrations, if appropriate security measures have been taken and appropriate change control is in place. So again, those are some of the things to look at. Now within Salesforce, administration should get the list of Salesforce administrators. That's a common challenge that we find, that there are too many administrators, people who don't really need to be administrators. If you're using vendors, you've noticed that many vendors have their accounts enabled months after they um, have left. So you may see many users with login, or even administrators with logins were last login 6 months back. So those are some of the audit findings that would come out. You should also look at list of user profiles, number of user profiles set up in Salesforce, and the audit configuration. So this is about the audit trail log and what have you configured in terms of the things that should be uh, logged and recorded on Salesforce logs, and how the Salesforce audit trail log is stored and monitored and reviewed. And the other thing you should look at is session security settings. Uh, Whether, so again, this is require secure connection should be turned on. So right here, that we should require that secure session is turned on. And I briefly touched about trusted IP ranges. So you can configure trusted IP ranges as well, so that only your IPs from your organization are able to access Salesforce and none others. So it's all configurable. It's a matter of asking if it's not configured, why is it not configured, and if it is configured, whether it's configured properly or not. And then there are file upload and download security settings that you can look at, and you can see what has been configured and match it with the requirements and assess the risks. And the other things you can look at is check security controls to see if any external callouts are being made. So this is where basically Salesforce is programmatically making any external callouts to other systems. So if it is enabled, and if there are external callouts being made, you need to just monitor that the callouts are being made to only those applications that are authorized, and there are no unauthorized external callouts being made. The other key area is Salesforce password policy. So we sometimes see that the password policy should be a certain way, but when we actually do the auditing, it turns out it's not actually configured the way it should be. Maybe the organization's IT folks are testing things and they've reduced the complexity requirements for password, and that has stayed on. So it's important to check the password complexity configuration and make sure you have it according to the security policy, that it is complex and password change. Typically best practice is to have it every 90 days and others. So and what other areas you should look at is if there are any client applications integrated with Salesforce, such as Outlook, Office, or others. And then you should also look at whether mobile app is allowed for Salesforce. And the way you can look at is by going into My Settings, Personal and Advanced User Details. And over there, Salesforce1 should be deselected if you don't want to give mobile access. And if you do want to give mobile access, it should be selected. Um, other areas to look at is whether Salesforce's forgot password functionality is enabled, and whether two-step verification is done, where Salesforce sends a 5-digit verification code, um, and to see whether security, and to check that, you can check by going into setup, security controls, activations, and check on activated devices for each user. So this is again going to the previous slide where we're seeing, okay, you can sample a few users and see how many activated devices there are for each user. Other questions to ask is weekly backup of Salesforce data performed? And are vendors, partners able to access Salesforce? And how do you monitor or manage or control vendors or partners or service providers access? And we talked about the two steps verification for device. So you can, there's even if you want to add a new device that you want to use to access Salesforce, Salesforce has the capability of having that two-step verification um, for Salesforce access. So from an audit perspective, you need to make sure, well, if that is allowed, if that's in place, if that's not in place, why is it not in place, to have that two-step verification. So it's always good to have more security rather than less. Well, this ends our session on cloud service auditing. And if you have any questions or need help with cloud service auditing, please feel free to send me an email at aabbas@biztechmasters.com or call us at the number listed here. Thanks for your time and have a great afternoon.